Hello, this is Nick Cap, and this is basically Chapter 45 on hormones and the endocrine system. This is going to be one of our very fast lectures. I'm hoping to be kind of not longer than 15 minutes, and so we will go over the material as quickly as we can. And let's see. Okay, so animal hormones are chemical signals that are secreted into the circulatory system, and they communicate messages to other parts of the body. The hormones reach all parts of the body, basically where everything that the blood gets, again, a mixture of the blood. Again, it's a long-distance regulator. Chemical signals by hormones are the function of the endocrine system. The nervous system is a network of specialized cells, neurons, that transmit signals along dedicated pathways. And again, the endocrine system touches every cell. The nervous system basically just touches cells that are parts of the nervous system. The nervous and endocrine systems kind of overlap in some of their functions, and they control each other a little bit. This slide here shows you a little bit of the difference between, so the endocrine signaling is basically where your cells that produce the signal goes into the circulatory system. It can move to another part where we see the cells that are response. In paracrine signaling, basically the cells release a signal that goes to the cells that are immediate adjacent to it. And autocrine signaling, auto meaning itself, signals to itself. Now this is a little bit different in a neuron, because in a neuron what you see is an axon that we have this thing called a synapse that actually causes a response. So you have to have physical locality in order to have that response. And again, we don't necessarily have that in the endocrine system. In the neuroendocrine system, we have some of these neurotransmitters can escape from the synapse and go into the other parts of the body and have effects over there. Hormones are secreted into extracellular fluids by the endocrine cells, and they reach their target via the bloodstream. The endocrine system maintains homeostasis, it mediates responses to stimuli, and it regulates growth and development of the cells in the body. And we will talk about that a little bit more. Again, this is a little bit like other systems that we can see that are similar to this would be the pheromones. And in pheromones, what's happening in hormones, the effect is within that organism, within those tissues. In pheromones, the effect is basically released into the environment, and it has an effect on other individuals in that environment. Pheromones serve many functions, including marking of trails, leading to food, defining territories, warning of predators, and attracting potential mates that we see. You do need to know what hormones are chemically, kind of what they are, and they're briefly divided up into two types, what we call water-soluble and lipid-soluble. In water-soluble, these are hydrophilic molecules that actually are dissolved into the blood and basically can't pass through a membrane. In the lipid-soluble, these molecules are hydrophobic. These include sterols like cholesterol, and they can actually move through plasma membranes pretty easily. Now we have another structures called like thyrine, amines, like epinephrine and like thyroxine, that we will talk a little bit later. So there's three classes of roughly hormones, and they are divided into two types, what we call the water-soluble and the water-insoluble types. Now, the big difference of these is kind of what they do. And in the water-soluble types that you see is the secretory cell will actually release the hormone. The hormone dissolves into the interstitial fluid, which goes into the circulatory system, which can dissolve out into the other interstitial fluid somewhere else in the body. And these, in order to have an activity within a cell, need to touch into a receptor on the outside of the plasma membrane, which then causes that reaction. The lipid-soluble hormones, on the other hand, are usually carried by some type of transport proteins. They have to be, otherwise they would not be miscible in the water. But they can actually go right through the plasma membrane, and they can have an effect on the inside of the cell. So it's important that you know this. An example of this would be a hormone like epinephrine. We saw the structure of an epinephrine. It is a water-soluble hormone. This particular hormone binds to a receptor called a G protein coupled receptor. It actually binds to a G protein, causing its activation, and it sets up a number of different secondary messengers. epinephrine inhibits glycogen synthesis. So when a cell makes glycogen, it's essentially storing some energy. And what this is doing, epinephrine is causing the cells to become more energetic and to break down glucose rather than to store it. The gene expression of a steroid hormone receptor, on the other hand, would be something like estradiol, which is estrogen. This estradiol can actually move through the phospholipid bilayer, and it can bind to a receptor inside the cell, and it causes the production of the vitellogen. These are estradiol is just an estrogen-like major female hormone. These are some of the major pollutants that we have, because again, the female birth control that humans take can have some of this, and this can end up in our environmental stream. And what's really kind of interesting is we can tell this because the vitellogenin is actually a protein that's responsive that we tend to see kind of in egg yolks, and when that's showing up in organisms and in their tissues, it's showing up that we have estradiol that is in the area. Picture of a male and female. The endocrine glands are located everywhere from the brain to the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys, the pancreas, the ovaries in the females, and the testes in the males. And so know what these are, know what some of their hormones are. I'll leave that up for you to look at. These hormones are assembled in kind of regulatory pathways. We'll talk a little bit about this. Hormones are released from an endocrine cell. They travel through the bloodstream and interact with specific receptors within a specific target cell to cause a specific physiological response. So it's very critical that this happens. An example of a simple endocrine pathway would be something like secretin signaling, which happens in the stomach. So we have a signal. This is kind of low pH in the duodenum. The S cells in the duodenum cause a hormone, produces secretin. This hormone then goes throughout the body. It causes specific target cells in the pancreas to release bicarbonate. And so again, low pH. That means it's acid in the duodenum, which it should not be. The release of this bicarbonate causes a negative feedback loop, which causes the low pH to get a little bit higher, more towards neutral, which then releases this signal, which stops these cells from being active. Pretty ingenious, isn't it? It's really neat that the cells can actually do this. Simple neuroendocrine pathways, and so a number of the neuroendocrine are these neuronal groups that produce hormones, and in a simple neuroendocrine pathway, the stimulus is received by a sensory neuron, which stimulates a neural secretory cell. The neural secretory cell secretes a neural hormone, which enters the bloodstream and travels to the target cells. And so an example of this would be oxytocin signaling. And so what's going on with oxytocin is that suckling of the mammary glands in the mother causes the release of oxytocin. Oxytocin moves throughout the body, and it causes the smooth muscle glands and the mammary glands to cause the milk release. And again, this is what we have in here, and this is actually a positive feedback. So the more suckling that you get, the more milk that you get. And again, it's one of those things that we'd see. This hormone that we would give mothers who gave maybe birth prematurely. This oxytocin has to be present in order for the milk to be released. And again, that's an example of a positive feedback, an example of a negative feedback, where it inhibits a response by reducing the initial stimulus and thus preventing excessive pathway activities. And positive feedback reinforces the stimulus to produce an even greater response. And again, that would be something like birth or releasing of milk, an example. And again, we gave you an example of that. The endocrine pathway that controls the molting of larvae originate in the larval brain. So invertebrates have hormones. All animals have hormones in here. And what we tend to see is the endocrine pathway controls the molting of larvae. And again, this occurs from the brain, and the thoracic gland, the PTTH, directs the release of echinosteroid. The bursts of echinosteroid trigger each successive molt as well as metamorphosis. The metamorphosis is not triggered until the levels of another hormone, juvenile hormone, drops. And so what we see in this case here is that there's a juvenile hormone inside these larva that keeps it a larva. However, when the brain says it's ready to go, it will actually release this particular hormone in here that, again, when the juvenile hormone is low, allow the molting to occur, and so that's been pretty well looked at before. Again, in vertebrates, we have something called the hypothalamus. It receives information from the nerves throughout the body, initiates appropriate neuroendocrine signals. It's at the base of the hypothalamus is what we call a pituitary gland. It's composed of posterior pituitary and anterior pituitary, and these actually store and secrete and possibly even make some hormones that are released into the body. So have an idea of where these are buried kind of deep inside the brain, up above the hard palate of the mouth. And what we see that this is the posterior pituitary. We see things like antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin that we talked about before. In the anterior front-facing, we have FSH and LH, which are involved in regulating the testes, and things like the growth hormone in human beings. Now, not all hormones have the same exact effect in each tissue, and so this is critical that you know this. And so in the liver cell, epinephrine, which is a hormone that's released, and we talked a little bit about this, amine hormones, it's water soluble, and what happens, it binds to a receptor on liver cells that actually cause glycogen to actually be used up, and so blood glucose levels actually increase. In the smooth muscle, these actually cause the smooth muscles to relax, and so things like your bronchial tubes will open up, and epinephrine in smooth muscle wall of blood vessels that supplies intestines contracts, and so that we're not digesting as much. And so this same hormone has a bunch of different effects depending on kind of what it does, and it's pretty special. Again, the role of the adrenal cortex. The adrenal glands are located right up above the kidneys, and they are adrenal cortex becomes active under stressful conditions, including low blood sugar, decreased blood volume, pressure, and shock. A series of hormonal signals leads to production and secretion of a family of steroids called the corticosteroids, or the stress steroids. Humans produce two types of corticosteroids in these adrenal glands. Glucocorticoids influence glucose metabolism in our immune system. Mineral corticoids, such as aldosterone, affect salt and water balance, and they can have a great effect in here. And so it's good that you kind of look at these. Other hormones are affecting things like our biological rhythm. So we have pineal gland, which is located in the brain and secretes melatonin. The primary function of the melatonin appeared to be related to biological rhythm associated with reproduction and with daily activity levels, your sleep and wake cycles. The release of melatonin by the pineal gland is controlled by a group of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN. And then over the course of evolution, the functions of particular hormones have kind of diverged. They don't exactly do the same thing. Again, prolactin has a broad range of activities in vertebrates. Here's a tadpole and a frog. The melanolite-stimulating hormone, MSS, regulates skin color in amphibians and fish. But in mammals, it plays a role in hunger and metabolism, as well as this kind of coloration. And so, again, we want you to come back and look at this, what we call negative feedback. In this negative feedback, you have a stimulus, causes a hormone, which causes a response, and this response reduces the stimulus. That is, it's negative on it. In a positive feedback, we have the opposite, where stimulus causes a hormone that causes a response that causes even a greater stimulus. And so, again, something that we want to have happen really quick and intensely can have this positive feedback. The hormone cascade, so we can have a stimulus that causes several hormones to occur in order to give us kind of this response, and this is able to give us a very fast, very quick response. And that's basically about it for what we're doing. So thanks a lot for watching my slideshow. Catch you later.